myself, well, how did I get here? Letting the days go by.
There are no other cats on the internet. I've checked. I wanted to talk to you guys today about something that's going to sound kind of weird, but I feel like talking about it anyway. I wanted to talk about, like, the nature of God and my experience of the mystical and how that's, like, changed over time. Obviously, that's an awful lot of stuff to compound into a short video. I'm just going to go over, like, a couple of things, kind of, like, sum stuff up rather than, like, really go in depth here. And all this monkey stuff, you may notice that there's an awful lot of monkey stuff going on here, especially for only round 3. Well, God has blessed me and given me lots of money, and he gave me some sun god monkeys and some cool druid monkeys and some sniper monkeys. And look at these guys. These guys move my cursor. Isn't that neat? That's neat, isn't it? This is just kind of have in the background so that there's something going on while I'm babbling. So, let it begin. So, basically what I wanted to share was my story more than anything. And to give like a little bit of an introduction, so I was raised in a non-religious family. Oh, 1 second, I'm distracted by... I don't even know if there were still balloons going. There was so much shooting going on. But anyway, I was raised in a non-religious family. My father is a lapsed Catholic. My mother has her own reasons that she no longer goes to church. I'm pretty sure they both still believe in God. But anyway, I was never raised with religion. It was just kind of something that I stumbled onto. And this is going to sound kind of weird. The thing that actually kind of first got me interested in religion wasn't like going to a church or something, like for a funeral or anything like that. No. And this is what I think is funny when I think back on it to this day. When I was younger, I watched a program on the History Channel because I always loved history. I always loved watching the History Channel. It was like my favorite thing. My favorite thing was to learn about new things historically that I didn't know about previously. And this was kind of before History Channel basically just turned into the Hitler Network. And then before it turned into Pawn Stars, the Pawn Star Network. I don't even know what it is anymore. I think there's like something about like, not truckers, but antiques and stuff, which I guess is kind of neat still. Anyway, so the first program I watched was this program called, I think it was just like Hell. I can't remember what it was called, but it was about hell. And I watched it. And at first, I was kind of scared. I was like, oh my god, am I gonna go to hell? What does this mean? But honestly, more than anything, I was intrigued. Like, just the idea of like, oh cool, I leveled up. Just the idea of like God was interesting to me. Like the idea that there was this being that was so beyond everything. Like, you know, like the hell stuff was like kind of an incentive, I guess, but it wasn't like the main incentive. There was something about it, like just learning about this figure, that made it immediately more just appealing. But that's about it. I remember I had a couple of weird, cringy incidents after that. There was one day where I was like trying to pray in the car on the way home but I didn't, because I wasn't raised in a religious family. I didn't know how to do it, so I was basically just sitting there, just going, "Hi God." I didn't know what I was doing. It was kind of funny. Where did my... But what ended up happening not long after that was I was just deciding I wanted to learn another language. Now, you know, you would think, being a filthy Americano cat, I would maybe try to learn Spanish or French. German would have made sense for me, because we lived in Germany for a little bit, so all that would have made sense. But no, for some reason, the language I decided I wanted to try and learn was Arabic. Just out of the blue, just the randomest choice. As far as I remember, there was nothing in particular that made me want to learn Arabic. So what I did was I just went onto YouTube and I just looked up Arabic lessons. Now, the thing that was interesting about this was that this would introduce me to a guy called Yusuf Estes. Yusuf Estes was a Christian man who became a Muslim after. Pretty sure he said he had like a Muslim guy like stay with him for a while. I think I'm trying not to completely butcher his story, but I think he had like a Muslim guy stay with him. I guess they all were talking, like him and his wife, like Yusuf Estes and his wife were talking to this guy, and eventually his wife decided that she wanted to convert to Islam, so she was looking for a divorce. And then Yusuf Estes, I believe, went and prayed, and that's how he decided that he was gonna become a Muslim. And now he's like a preacher. Anyway, I was looking for Arabic lessons. The first Arabic lesson was not from Yusuf Estes. It was from this big, I think Somali guy actually, who sounded really cool, but he was kind of difficult to understand. So then I find this honky who's teaching Arabic. I'm like, okay, I can at least understand what this guy's saying. It turns out Yusuf Estes has this video series called like the Beauties of Islam. I think it's still available on YouTube. Not 100% sure, but I started watching the Beauties of Islam, and well, to cut to the chase, I was just enamored. Just something about so much of what was being said enamored with it, and made so much sense to me. Now, really, the thing about that was kind of funny was that I was like 13 when I decided this. I said the Shahada, and I became a Muslim in practice, but what's kind of funny about that to me is that I didn't have any fucking clue what I was doing. So, for instance, he said that they needed to pray 5 times a day. I'm like, okay, but because I didn't know what that meant, what I did was I ended up just doing like 5 bows and like doing like the little bit of Arabic prayer I knew, which was very limited. But it was a start. Now, what was interesting, it's hard to know if this is coincidence or if this is something else. It's very weird. I don't know. But I was in high school at the time, 13, turned 14, and there was another guy there who happened to be Muslim. And his background was incredibly similar to mine in a variety of ways. Not entirely. We were very different people. It's kind of interesting how different we actually were. But he had a military parent. He had converted to Islam in similar kind of sketchy situation. Well, not sketchy, but similar kind of at first ill-informed situation that turned into him being far more knowledgeable than I was. It was interesting. I sat down with him at lunch one day, and we were talking, and I sort of realized how little I actually knew about Islam. He was the catalyst. He got me my first actual Quran that I could read. He was the catalyst for me to actually learn about Islam and actually start practicing. And I became, I want to say, somewhat hardcore for a little while there. I was kind of enamored with the Salafis. That was not like Yusuf Estes is, I would certainly say, a conservative Muslim, but he wasn't a Salafi as far as I knew. And he might be, I don't know. I don't know what his position is on all of that stuff. But anyway, I ended up becoming like really into like the strict versions of Islam. There was like a whole period where I was like arguing with my parents. Whenever there was like pork was what we had for dinner, I would argue with my parents. I spent almost every single weekend over with my friend, and we would learn about Islam, and we were doing all kinds of stuff together. We were praying, and I was getting much, much more into it. However, I think about a year, maybe a year and a half or so in, I started to have more and more questions. It didn't really seem to add up. Just like little things where it's like, if you're just like into philosophy, you can have questions and it's not a really big deal. But if you believe that like you're like following the religion from God, even tiny mistakes, and even tiny little errors, questions that don't make sense to you, or little things like that can become very serious. Because now it's not just, oh, I'm not sure about this. Now there's like a different kind of gravity to it. Anyway, most of my doubts at first were pretty minor, really. It was kind of funny too, because I ended up getting better at arguing when I was doing this because I would go into online chat rooms and I actually managed to convert several people. Um, and I also found that there was a home for me there in spirituality. There was I could never really find a comparison elsewhere. There was it just felt so natural. But as time went on, more and more, I had a variety of doubts. I was kind of discovering like my sexuality at this point, and kind of realizing that well, I wasn't exactly a straight kitty. But that's beside the point. That was part of it, and it was all kind of mixing together to make it so that I was getting more and more doubtful as time went on. What ended up happening though is my friend ended up going into the Navy. So now we were no longer right next to each other. And I realized very quickly that without him constantly being like an influence, and I don't want to say a bad influence, certainly, but without him constantly being an influence around me, I started to have way more doubts. Like way more. I just started to realize like, do I actually believe this? This was also kind of at the time when I had first like gotten I started dating a trans person at the time, and that was causing a lot of like doubts in my head because I'm like, how can I how can I believe in Islam while also doing this? Something that is, I would say, very clearly forbidden. Like if like the Quran itself does not give the death penalty, or does not like say that you should kill people for being gay or whatever. But there's certainly some hadith that would imply that's at the very least it's a sin. We'll put it that way. I'm not gonna get into all the theological stuff right this second. But so this kind of led me to being like, okay, I don't really know if I believe in this. And then very quickly, I went from I like left Islam, and certain people reacted to that very poorly. I remember there was one guy in particular that was like from the mosque who's like, "You're on a dark path now." My friend did not actually immediately stop being friends with me. Interestingly enough, he did have his other Muslim friend from I can't remember where he was staying, somewhere on the East Coast. But he had his other Muslim friend who was there call me, and he wanted to argue with me. And I remember, to be perfectly honest with you, I was kind of a dick in that argument. Like, kind of just like your typical atheist Reddit dickhead at that point, which is funny because I wasn't even like on Reddit at that time. But like, my lord, I look back at some of the arguments I made, I'm like, very Reddity. Um, but we had a kind of terrible argument. He was saying a lot of stuff that I personally still think is pretty messed up, but I'm not going to get into all of the stuff he said. Some of it was heinous, we'll say that much. Anyway, so after that, I'm around 18 now. About 3-4 months after as in 18 in the story at that point. Not 18 now. But anyway, he he and I kind of drifted apart over time. I don't really know much of what happened to him. I'm pretty sure he's married now. Good for him, and I hold nothing against him. But he and I very clearly drifted apart. Then at that point, I kind of got into just like being like an atheist dickhead and just arguing with everyone and saying like religion is a cult and stuff like that. And to be fair, with the way I behaved, especially towards my parents and a few other people, I can't help but say, I mean, I was certainly incredibly arrogant, and I was certainly doing a lot of things that were very arrogant and distasteful because of religion or because of what I believed about my religion. However, to be perfectly fair to it, Islam doesn't tell you to go around and be like, you know, a dick to everybody. It doesn't. That's not one of the commandments. It's not like part of the law. Anyway, so there was this long period where I would say 3 years, maybe four. It's kind of all blends together after a while, where I didn't really believe in God, at least outwardly. There was a certain yearning in my person the entire time for the spiritual that was kind of incongruous with the way I was like behaving outwardly, but inwardly I knew I still wanted like the spiritual when I was in Islam, when I was really praying, when I was really giving it like when I was like really focusing on God, that had given me a home that I just could not seem to find outside of like a spiritual path. So and then the longer it was going on, the more I was just becoming just like this kind of hateful, honestly just like nihilistic person. I don't blame not having God in my life at that time for why I was doing this. Honestly, towards the end there, I was slipping into like suicidal, nihilistic nonsense. Just nothing really felt like it was worth anything. And part of this, I think, is because I had dedicated myself to Islam so much, and then after I found out, or at least felt at that time, that it was no longer true in the way I had originally thought it was true, now I just didn't really have anything. It felt like I couldn't trust anything. It's like I spent these 3.5, almost 4 years incredibly dedicated to this, and then it just kind of felt like, okay, that was just a complete waste of time. And then from there, I honestly just kind of felt like I couldn't dedicate myself to anything. Everything, I was like, well, I can't put my time into this because what if it turns out to be false? And this was for everything, school paths, career stuff, everything just felt bad. Now, this is also kind of around the time when I really started to realize that it wasn't just that I was kind of a weird kid, because I'd always thought I was kind of a weird kid, but then I was starting to realize, oh, I have a lot of anxiety. Like, a lot. Oh, Lord, I have a lot of hatred in me, like, a lot of anger. Like to put it in perspective, I was getting to a point where I was a borderline Nazi, and I only say borderline because I could never really convince myself to hate the Jews. It was just it's a weird thing to do. I don't know. Like even at like my most hateful, which it was getting pretty hateful, but even at my most hateful, I couldn't. It never really made that part. Just never made that much sense to me. And funny enough, part of what ended up getting me out of all of this was that like when I was 22 or so, I think it was like yeah 22, like halfway through my 22nd year of life, I just started to be like, man, this just feels like bad all the time. I just feel bad all the time. I feel like I'm just not getting anywhere. And what I ended up doing is I ended up getting really into philosophy again. I ended up getting really into a couple different figures. Jordan Peterson was just one, which is kind of funny because I don't think very highly of Jordan Peterson now, but at the same time, I can't say that his message didn't help me at a time when I was very, very bad off. It was him, but it was also people like I started reading more about like Maimonides. Now, keep in mind, this entire time, religion has never completely left my life. I was still reading about religion all the time because it was still fascinating to me, and but I just didn't believe it. I have a bunch of books on my shelf right now that are all about Judaism and Torah and Maimonides and all that. And a lot of that was actually I bought during this time. I started reading more Talmud. And there was a brief period where I was like, maybe I want to be Jewish. And then, like, the longer I was thinking about it, it's like, I don't know. Like, I don't really know how I feel about. I still didn't know how I felt about God at this time. But as I progressed, and got better and better, and I started getting to things like one of the things I did was I got a stable job. I felt like that helped out a lot, and I was trying to pray. I tried briefly to become a Christian for no other reason. It was like if I'm searching for something, it seems like Christianity would be one of the easiest to explore, just because United States, and I could at least try to go to churches. This is the time when I started going to like a bunch of different churches. The thing that was always funny about this to me is that I never felt at home in church. Now, At least when people were there. If I could go to churches when people weren't there, I love them. I have always loved religious buildings. They're great. I love cathedrals. I love temples. I love mosques. All of it. Love them. But then when people are there, it immediately gets weird. I remember one of the first churches I went to was this local, like it's like a little non-denominational church, and I remember being kind of weirded out when they started singing. I was like, "What can wash away my sins? Nothing but the blood of Jesus." I remember thinking that was a little weird. Then I went to another church, and that ended up being a whole thing where some lady kept calling and asking me to like buy her cigarettes and then bring them to her trailer park. I don't know what that was about. That was weird. Um, the only reason she was able to get my number, and this was, I guess I was trying to be friendly, but I was just, this was dumb of me. I gave the pastor my phone number because she was talking about having upcoming events and so that she would like let me know, like text me, like, hey, if there's upcoming events going. I'm like, okay, whatever. I'm here. It's not that big of a deal. It's like also like really close to where I live. Didn't realize she was gonna fucking give it to everybody, but she did. Very good. Thank you. Anyway, there was also, I tried going to a Baptist church at one point. That didn't really work out. I remember that this was kind of getting to the point where I was starting to think I believed in God more, but just not quite the version they had. Um, where we eventually got to though was I was working this job where I was basically going to all kinds of different places, and I was doing it for like 9 months. Like it was 9 months at like a security job where I just bounced to different locations and stuff. And I started to hate it. I eventually got to a place where I could be more permanent, and I'm like, okay, I'll stay here. And then once I got staying there and things got back to being stable, I decided to really try and dive into what is it that I actually believe at this point in my life. What am I trying to do? Why am I trying to do it? Is it irrational for me to be pursuing this like divinity and all this other stuff for so long? Is it irrational? Am I just wasting my time? Because pretty much throughout this entire journey, I was having two different versions kind of fighting in my head. There was the version that I would call, I don't want to necessarily say fedora hat atheist, but like a version that was very interested in proof. It didn't want faith, it wanted proof. And then there was this other part of me that was very interested in the idea of just like faith, and like there was just like this yearning. I knew I had this yearning. I was like, okay, look, we can sit here and talk as much as we want about there not being proof or whatever, but there's a very strong yearning here that I can't just, it's hurting me to just ignore it outright. And it was just kind of a back and forth until eventually I read this book. It was a book called Why Buddhism is True. And the title itself is not actually like an argument trying to tell people to convert to Buddhism or anything like that. It's a very interesting book. I would recommend it to anybody who wants to check out that sort of thing. Very good. But it it was the arguments presented in the book and the stuff I was learning about Buddhism. Uh, it was very interesting to me. It was like, especially once they started talking about some of the psychological aspects involved. Like I had already kind of come to believe that you can't necessarily 100% just trust your own mind. For instance, your head will try to justify things to you that if you really stop and think about them, don't make any sense. There's all kinds of stuff, and I'm sure some of you might say, "Well, that's what your brain was doing right there." Blah blah blah. I know. I can hear you, people, but there was, and as I learned more and got more into it, eventually what I would start doing was I would start meditating daily, and I would start practicing, and I discovered another channel called um, Doug's Dharma, and Doug's Dharma is entirely dedicated to early Buddhism, and I started to watch his videos on a pretty much daily basis, and honestly, I still watch his videos quite frequently. Um, and it just occurred to me, I kind of believed it. I just realized I was like, I think I believe that the Buddha was at least enlightened in some sense. I don't know about mystical or magical or anything like that, but like, there's something here. There's something to this. So I started practicing, and I just started to feel much, much better. I started to have a goal to work towards, a spiritual goal, and it just felt natural. And this continued to develop. What it would eventually happen is I would, and it was all on a whim. This stuff kept happening on a whim. Was I just decided to pick up and read the Bhagavad Gita. Now I had read Bhagavad Gita before this point. I had read it before this point, but I was rereading it, and I don't know if it was because of the meditation or because of like just the situation I was in, but it just clicked. Just something about the description of God in the Bhagavad Gita, just something about the description of life and what the purpose of things was, and the illusions involved, and all of this just clicked so perfectly in a way that I don't think I've ever had anything since click. And once it clicked, I was like, oh, this is what I've been looking for. And one of the first things I did after that was I bought a couple statues of Krishna, and I started doing some Hindu puja. Very simple puja, mine, just because I don't necessarily think that ritual is the most important thing for this kind of stuff. But I started doing some basic puja, and I just started to feel freaking awesome. It was interesting. It's like, oh my lord, I gained back this relationship, and it just kind of happened. And then the other thing that was weird was I had felt a strong, the more I was pursuing this and the more I was reading into this, the more I got into these very strong feelings towards two particular divinities. One being Shiva, Lord Shiva, and the other being Kali. These two deities in particular just I don't know what it was. They were just incredibly attractive to me. And I kept, so I started kind of directing my puja less towards Krishna, toward Krishna, and more towards Shiva. And then one day, um, just kind of out of the blue, I decided that I wanted to. I was like, well, I keep thinking about Kali, but I don't actually do anything related to Kali. And it was interesting because what it, I ended up having quite a strong experience. We'll leave it at that. A very, very strong experience. And what this experience ended up being was basically me just like having a very. If you've never had a mystical experience, they're incredibly difficult to describe. And honestly, I don't know if you can describe them, have them make sense to anyone who hasn't had that sort of thing. Uh, but basically, what it was at the time I was taking recreational drugs somewhat regular basis. Nothing crazy. I won't describe which drugs, but nothing like hardcore. Say that. And it was just like a very, very strong feeling of you need to stop this, and you need to do this, and you need to have these. And it was like 2 weeks. Very strongly, I got the impression that I needed to do 2 weeks of being clean at least, and I needed to do 2 weeks of like dedication, like chanting mantras, like meditating on like the image of the goddess of the great mother, and also like Shiva. And so I did. And then I felt better. What would eventually end up happening was that I would have more of these experiences, almost all tied to Kali or Shiva. And I would learn more, and I've read more, and it's kind of led me to this kind of weird position. Not necessarily a position that's completely incongruous either. I find that the descriptions of God that we get in almost any text it's never going to be enough. You're never going to have enough words to describe what that reality is really like, the complexity of it, the difficulties involved in figuring out, like, what does all of this mean together? Do these visions mean something, or is it just, you know, like random nonsense? And it gets difficult, but eventually you're either going to have to make peace with it internally, or you're going to have to, you know, you're just going to sit there forever questioning yourself. And I found that once I made peace with it and really tried understand, that everything just kind of came together in a way that I wasn't expecting. Like, God is so infinitely open to all things, and is like, it's like the ultimate order and the ultimate chaos all at once. It's too much. It's too much. And I I was just like, as these experiences happened more and more, and now they still occasionally happen, not as much. There was a brief period where they were like a lot, like a lot. But eventually, it just kind of came down to being like, okay, I think I know where I'm at. I think I know where I'm at, and I know what I'm pursuing. I know how complex this reality gets. I know that there are often not simple answers, and even when there are simple answers, it doesn't mean living them out is simple. And these days, I basically still kind of practice like a Buddhist, really, more than anything. Keep to the five precepts. I try to meditate on a daily basis. I've had moments where I've lapsed on that, or, periods where I've lapsed on that. And, like, I sit and I contemplate like the images of God, but I also don't even think that the images of God that have kind of the ones that originally brought forth all this crazy stuff, I don't really think that they're accurate to describe the whole of it. Like, I keep going back to the Tao Te Ching, because it's like it almost feels like it's like has the perfect descriptor of God, which is the name that can be named is not the eternal name. The Tao that can be taught is not the eternal Tao. Various kind of phrases, and it just keeps coming back. Where it's like it's so complicated and it's so different than what you might expect. So, like, my experience previously with religion made it feel like it was a, ooh, level up. Like, it was so binding and controlling in a way, but this was so much more free and liberating. It's like, oh, this yearning, this longing, I can feel it and still have a meaningful life. You don't necessarily have to choose between, God and the material world. It's not that simple. It's like these crazy ideas that we kind of have about what religion is, or what it has to be, or what it should be, or will always be, etc. And it was so interesting to break away from that. Feel like I feel truly free and just truly happy for the first time in a long time, and it was just so weird to think about this journey and like all the steps that got me to where I am now. And I could be further along in my material life. There's lots of things I could have done differently. But I realize now that if I had done certain things that I had considered doing, not like anything too crazy, mostly just stuff, or mostly like forcing myself to go into certain fields that I didn't want to get into, except then I wouldn't be happy. I wouldn't have dealt with my anxiety. I wouldn't have dealt all of this stuff if I had just tried to push through. It wouldn't have worked. And that was, I don't know. It's a lot to think about. Sometimes I just go, wow, we had a weird ass journey to get here, man. A weird ass journey. Uh, and the more I've looked into the mystical experience, the more it's like it seems like there's a certain line that goes through specifically mystical experience. Not necessarily all religion, but mystical experience itself seems to be united and tied together in a way that a lot of regular religion just isn't. And I continue to try and explore that every day, and I continue to try and do better and learn more, etc. And I just have to say, I'm so very glad I'm at where I'm at. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to share all of that. It's been on my mind lately, and it just kind of felt like it might be kind of fun to make a video with Monkey. Monkey is still there. It's still turn. Um, so thanks for listening. If you want to subscribe, that'd be cool. I said cool, but it sounded like I said cruel. Huh. But I be making more kind of weird content. I like playing video games. I like recording them. But the more I'm thinking about it, the more I kind of just want to just babble. I like a babbling, and I feel like doing that. And if you want to listen to my babbling, well, there will be more of it. So thanks for stopping by. Um, and yes, I'm probably gonna win the monkey round. If you're looking going, there's still 17 rounds left, but yeah, I'm gonna win the monkey. Monkey win. Monkey power. Monkey powder. Thank you. Bye bye. Have a great